The fluorescent lights of the downtown cafe buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the chipped formica tables. I sat hunched in the corner booth, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, staring at the murky liquid as if it held answers I desperately needed. The acrid taste of cheap beans still coated my tongue, mixing with the metallic flavor of fear that had become my constant companion. My phone lay face down on the table between my trembling fingers, its screen dark and silent now after the storm of messages that had flooded it an hour ago. 17 missed calls, 32 texts, each one a variation of the same theme, accusations wrapped in concern, threats disguised as love, manipulation painted as protection. You can't just leave. I know where you are. You're making a mistake. No one else will understand you like I do. The words blurred together in my mind, an endless loop that had played for years, wearing grooves into my sense of self until I barely recognized the woman I'd become. 27 years old, and I felt ancient, hollowed out. A shell of someone who had once dreamed of more than just surviving each day. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and I flinched instinctively, my shoulders drawing up toward my ears in that familiar, protective posture I'd perfected over 3 years of walking on eggshells. My heart hammered against my ribs as I fought the urge to look up, to see if somehow he had found me despite my careful planning, despite the burner phone I'd bought with cash, despite changing my routine completely. But it wasn't him. The man who entered moved with a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the small space, his presence immediately commanding attention without demanding it. I noticed his expensive wool coat first, the way it hung perfectly from broad shoulders, then the tailored charcoal suit beneath it, that spoke of wealth so understated it was almost aggressive in its simplicity. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and controlled power, with eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. I looked away quickly, my therapist's voice echoing in my head. Don't make yourself smaller. Don't disappear. But old habits died hard, and I found myself shrinking further into the worn vinyl of the booth, willing myself invisible. The man ordered an espresso at the counter, his voice a low rumble that carried an accent I couldn't quite place. Eastern European, perhaps, though refined by years in other places. The barista, a college student who usually moved with the efficiency of someone juggling 3 jobs, fumbled with the machine, suddenly clumsy under his steady gaze. I should have been focusing on my escape plan, on the bus ticket to Portland tucked in my jacket pocket, on the small bag I'd hidden at the bus station containing everything I owned that mattered. 3 years of my life reduced to a single backpack. Some clothes, my grandmother's necklace, the journal where I documented every incident in careful detail at my lawyer's insistence. Instead, I found myself watching this stranger from beneath lowered lashes, studying the way he moved with such deliberate control, as if every gesture had been calculated for maximum effect. When the barista handed him his espresso with shaking hands, he offered a small nod of thanks that somehow conveyed more warmth than any smile could. Then he turned, and his eyes found mine with such precision that I knew he'd been aware of my scrutiny all along. I looked down immediately, heat flooding my cheeks, my pulse racing. The old panic rose in my throat, bitter and familiar. Looking at men had consequences. Noticing anything outside the narrow boundaries I'd been given had consequences. Even thoughts could be dangerous if they showed on my face. Is this seat taken? The question was asked in that same low voice, respectful and somehow gentle, despite the inherent authority it carried. I looked up to find him standing beside my booth, one hand resting lightly on the back of the opposite seat, waiting for permission he didn't need to take what he wanted. That small courtesy, that acknowledgement of my right to refuse, nearly undid me. No, I managed, my voice rough from crying earlier. It's not taken. He slid into the seat across from me with fluid grace, setting his espresso down carefully, before folding his hands on the table. Up close, I could see the details I'd missed from across the room. The faint scar along his jawline, the silver at his temples that suggested he was perhaps 15 years older than me, the expensive watch on his wrist that probably cost more than I'd earned in the past year. But it was his eyes that held me captive. Pale gray, almost silver in the cafe's harsh light, They studied me with an intensity that should have terrified me but somehow didn't. There was no judgment there, no calculation of my worth or assessment of my usefulness. Just a quiet attention that made me feel, for the first time in years, actually seen. "You've been crying," he observed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than pitying. "And you keep looking at the door as if expecting someone unwelcome." I opened my mouth to deny it, to offer some polite deflection that would maintain the fiction that everything was fine, but something in his steady gaze made the lies stick in my throat. "I'm leaving him," I heard myself say, the words barely above a whisper. "Today. For good this time." The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between us, a sharpening of focus that reminded me of a predator catching scent of prey. Yet I didn't feel like the target of that focused attention. I felt protected by it. "This time," he repeated softly, catching the implication immediately. "You've tried before." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway, my hands tightening around the cold mug until my knuckles went white. "He always finds me, always has some reason why I need to come back, why leaving would be the biggest mistake of my life." My voice cracked on the last words. "He makes me believe him." "That's what they do," the man said quietly. "Men who need to control others. They make you doubt your own reality until you can't trust your own judgment." I stared at him, shocked by his immediate understanding. Most people, when I'd tried to explain what living with emotional abuse was like, had offered platitudes or confusion. "Why don't you just leave?" they'd ask, as if it were that simple, as if 3 years of systematic erosion hadn't left me questioning whether I was even capable of surviving alone. "How did you know?" I whispered. His mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "I've seen what control looks like, the aftermath of it." He paused, then added with quiet intensity, "And I've seen strong people broken by it, made to believe they were weak." "I don't feel strong," I admitted, the confession dragging itself from somewhere deep and raw. "I feel terrified. I don't know who I am anymore without him telling me." "That's the point of what he did to you," the man said, his voice hard now, anger flickering beneath the controlled surface. "To make you forget yourself so completely that you'd need him to exist." Tears burned behind my eyes, and I blinked them back furiously. I'd cried enough today, wept into my pillow at the motel where I'd spent last night, sobbed in the shower as I scrubbed away the feeling of invisible chains. I was done crying. "What's your name?" he asked, shifting the conversation with practiced ease. "Clara," I said, then hesitated. "Is it okay that I told you that?" The flash of fury that crossed his face was there and gone so quickly I almost missed it, but I felt its heat. "Clara," he repeated, infusing the name with a respect that made my chest ache. "It's more than okay. Your name belongs to you, not to anyone else. You decide who deserves to know it." Such a simple concept, yet revolutionary. For 3 years, I'd been told when to speak, what to say, which friends were appropriate, and which were threats to our relationship. I'd been molded and shaped until I fit into the narrow definition of what he needed me to be. My edges filed down, my voice quieted, my dreams dismissed as childish fantasies. "I'm Victor," the man said, extending his hand across the table. I hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was warm and calloused in unexpected places, his grip firm but careful, as if he was conscious of his own strength and the fragility of what he held. When his fingers closed around mine, I felt something shift in my chest, like a door I hadn't known was locked suddenly swinging open. "Clara," he said again, still holding my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles in a gesture that felt protective rather than possessive. "Where are you going?" "Portland, you said." I froze, my mind racing. I hadn't mentioned Portland out loud. Had I? Victor must have seen the panic flash across my face because he released my hand and gestured to the table. "Bus ticket, corner of the envelope showing." I looked down to see the edge of the ticket peeking from my jacket pocket where I'd shoved it hastily. Relief and embarrassment washed over me in equal measure. "I have a cousin there," I explained, tugging the ticket free and staring at the departure time. 3 hours. She offered me her spare room while I figure things out. "Good," Victor said with a decisive nod. Family support is important. But 3 hours is a long time to sit alone in a cafe, looking over your shoulder. He was right. Already my neck ached from the constant vigilance, my stomach churned with anxiety, my hands trembled from adrenaline that had nowhere to go. Every minute felt like an eternity, every shadow in my peripheral vision a potential threat. I don't have anywhere else to go, I admitted quietly. I can't go back to my apartment. He knows I'm there. The motel I stayed at last night wasn't safe. I saw his car drive past twice. This cafe is public enough that I feel like I can breathe, but not so crowded that I can't see everyone who comes in. Victor studied me for a long moment, and I had the unsettling sensation that he was seeing far more than I'd revealed. Reading the story written in my defensive posture and bitten nails, and the way I'd positioned myself with my back to the wall and clear line of sight to both exits. There's a hotel 2 blocks from here, he said finally. The Continental. Very secure, very private. I know the manager well. You could wait there in comfort and safety until your bus departs. I shook my head before he'd even finished. I can't afford that. I have exactly $83 to my name until I can access my bank account without him getting notifications. I wasn't asking you to pay for it, Victor said quietly. The offer hung between us, loaded with implications I couldn't fully process. A stranger wanting to help me, to protect me, with no apparent expectation of anything in return. Every instinct I'd developed over the past 3 years screamed that this was a trap. That kindness always came with conditions. That accepting help meant owing something I couldn't afford to pay. But Victor's eyes held no manipulation, no hidden agenda I could detect. Just a steady certainty that seemed to say he'd made a decision and expected it to be followed. Why would you do that? I asked, my voice barely audible. You don't know me. Because someone should, he replied simply. Because you shouldn't have to spend the next 3 hours afraid. Because every person deserves to feel safe, especially when they're taking the brave step of reclaiming their life. The words wrapped around me like a blanket, warm and unexpected. Brave. He'd called me brave. Not weak, not dramatic, not overreacting. Brave. I don't even know if I'm doing the right thing, I confessed, the doubt I'd been pushing down all day finally breaking through. What if he's right? What if I can't make it on my own? What if I'm throwing away something good because I'm too damaged to appreciate it? Seemed Clara. Victor's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts with quiet authority. Look at me. I did, meeting those pale eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense I'd erected. What he did to you, making you question your own reality, your own worth, your own judgment. That's not love. That's control. And you're not damaged, you're surviving. There's a profound difference. How do you know? The question came out as barely more than a breath, because I understand what power looks like, he said, something dark flickering across his features. What it costs, and what it can destroy when wielded without conscience. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed against the table, vibrating with another incoming message. I didn't need to look to know what it would say. More promises, more threats, more manipulation disguised as love. Victor's gaze dropped to the phone, then returned to my face. You don't have to answer that. You don't owe him your attention or your time or any explanation for choosing yourself. He'll keep calling, I said helplessly. He'll find me eventually. He always does. Not this time. The certainty in Victor's voice was absolute, unshakable. Not if you don't want him to. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this time would be different, that I could actually escape the suffocating reality I'd been living. But hope was dangerous. Hope had betrayed me before, left me vulnerable to disappointment, and the grinding return to hopelessness. Come, Victor said, standing with fluid grace and extending his hand once more. Let me help you wait somewhere safe. No obligations, no expectations. Just a quiet room where you can breathe until your bus leaves. I looked at his outstretched hand, at the strength evident in the corded muscles of his forearm, at the expensive watch glinting at his wrist. Everything about him screamed power and danger and the kind of authority that didn't ask permission. But his eyes held only patience. Slowly, my hand trembling slightly. I reached out and placed my palm in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and sure, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel the weight of invisible chains tightening around me. I felt, impossibly, like I might actually be free. The Continental Hotel rose before us like something from another world, all gleaming glass and polished chrome that reflected the weak afternoon sunlight. I'd passed this building 100 times over the years, always rushing past with my head down, never imagining I'd walk through its imposing entrance. The doorman, an older gentleman in an immaculate uniform, nodded respectfully to Victor and held the door open without question, his gaze sliding past me with the practiced discretion of someone trained to see nothing. Inside, the lobby took my breath away. Marble floors stretched beneath crystal chandeliers, their light soft and golden compared to the harsh fluorescence of the cafe I'd just left. Fresh flowers, massive arrangements of orchids and roses that probably cost more than my monthly rent, perfumed the air with their delicate scent. Everything spoke of wealth so casual it didn't need to announce itself. I felt acutely out of place in my worn jeans and oversized sweater, a thrift store coat that had seen better days hanging from my shoulders. But Victor's hand remained steady at the small of my back, not possessive, just present, guiding me through the opulent space as if I belonged there as much as anyone. The woman behind the reception desk looked up as we approached, her professional smile warming to genuine pleasure when she recognized Victor. "Mr. Volkov, what a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting you until next week. Change of plans, Natasha?" Victor replied, his tone cordial, but with an undercurrent of authority that made her straighten slightly. "I need a suite for my guest. Something quiet, secure. She'll be staying for a few hours only." Natasha's gaze flicked to me with curiosity, but she masked it quickly, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. "Of course. The Riverside suite on the 15th floor is available. Very private, excellent security. Shall I have someone bring up anything specific? Perhaps some refreshments?" "Tea," Victor said, glancing at me for confirmation. I nodded mutely, still trying to process the casual ease with which he'd arranged this. "And something light to eat. She hasn't had lunch." I opened my mouth to protest that he couldn't possibly know that, then closed it again. He was right. The knot in my stomach had prevented me from eating anything since the stale toast I'd forced down at the motel that morning. Within minutes, we were in the elevator, rising smoothly through the building's floors. Victor stood beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive with notes of sandalwood and spice. He didn't speak, didn't fill the silence with empty conversation, just allowed me the space to adjust to this sudden shift in my reality. The suite was more than I could have imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river, the water sparkling in the afternoon light. A plush sofa faced the view, paired with armchairs that looked impossibly comfortable. Through an open door, I could see a bedroom with a bed so large and inviting that exhaustion washed over me just looking at it. "The bathroom is through there," Victor said, gesturing to another door. "Everything you need should be stocked. Take your time. Rest if you want. I'll be in the sitting area if you need anything." "You're staying?" The question came out more accusatory than I'd intended, and I immediately regretted it. This man had done nothing but help me, and here I was, throwing his kindness back in his face. But Victor didn't seem offended. "Only if you're comfortable with that. I thought you might prefer not to be alone right now, but if I'm wrong, I can wait in the lobby until your bus time." I considered this, weighing my ingrained distrust against the strange sense of safety I felt in his presence. "You can stay," I said finally, "if you don't mind. I just don't want to be an inconvenience." Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. "You could never be that, Clara." The way he said my name, with such deliberate respect, as if it mattered, made my throat tight. I turned away quickly, moving toward the windows to hide the sudden tears that threatened. Behind me, I heard him settle into one of the armchairs, the leather sighing softly. A moment later, there was a discreet knock at the door, and he rose to accept the tea service and covered plates that room service delivered with impressive speed. "Come," he said gently. "You should eat something." I turned to find him arranging the items on the coffee table with careful precision, treating the simple task with the same focused attention he seemed to give everything. The tea set was elegant, simple white porcelain with gold trim. The food was equally understated. Delicate sandwiches cut into triangles, fresh fruit, small pastries that looked like they'd come from a French bakery. I sank onto the edge of the sofa, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the morning was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made every movement feel like pushing through water. Victor poured tea into one of the cups with steady hands, adding nothing before passing it to me. "Plain," he said at my questioning look. "Until you tell me otherwise." Another small courtesy, another acknowledgement that my preferences mattered. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into my cold fingers. "How long were you with him?" Victor asked quietly, selecting one of the chairs positioned at an angle to the sofa. Not directly facing me, which would have felt confrontational, but near enough to hear and be heard. 3 years, I said, staring into the amber liquid. We met at a gallery opening. He was charming, attentive, made me feel like I was the only person in the room. I thought I was so lucky. "The beginning is always perfect with men like that," Victor observed. "They have to be. How else would they hook you?" I nodded, taking a small sip of the tea. It was good. Much better than the coffee I'd been nursing all morning. The changes were so gradual at first. He'd suggest I shouldn't wear certain things because they might give men the wrong idea. Then it was that my friends were a bad influence, that they didn't understand our connection. Then I should quit my job because he made enough money for both of us, and wouldn't it be nice if I could focus on making our home perfect? "Isolating you," Victor said, his voice hardening. "Removing your support system and financial independence." I didn't see it happening, I admitted. Or maybe I did, and I told myself it meant he loved me, that he was just protective, that I was special because he cared so much. That's what they want you to believe. I looked up at him, this stranger who understood with such clarity what I'd barely been able to articulate to my therapist. "You sound like you've seen this before." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have, too many times. Women, men, it doesn't matter. Controllers all use the same playbook. They find someone strong and systematically break them down until they can't remember what they were before." "Were you?" I asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Sorry, that's none of my business." "No," Victor said, his gaze distant. "But someone close to me was. I didn't see it in time to help her." He refocused on me with sudden intensity. "Which is why I recognize the signs now. Why I won't ignore them when I see them." The weight of old pain in his voice was unmistakable. Whoever he'd lost, whatever had happened, it had left scars as deep as the ones I carried. "What happened to her?" I asked softly. "She believed him when he said she couldn't survive without him," Victor said, his expression controlled but his eyes betraying an old rage. "She stayed, and it destroyed her. By the time I understood what was happening, she was already gone. Not dead." He added quickly at my expression, but so diminished that the person I knew had effectively ceased to exist. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He shook his head sharply. "Don't apologize for what others have done. You carry enough without taking on guilt that isn't yours." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding settling between us. Victor leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped loosely between them. "What will you do in Portland?" he asked, deliberately changing the subject. "I don't know," I admitted. "My cousin Sarah offered me a place to stay while I figure things out. I need to find a job, something that pays enough to let me save for my own place eventually. I used to work in graphic design before he convinced me to quit. Maybe I can find something in that field again." "You have skills then," Victor observed. "That's good. It will help you rebuild." "If I can remember how to use them," I said with a bitter laugh. "It's been 3 years. Technology moves fast, and I'm not sure anyone will hire someone with that kind of gap in their resume." "Then you tell them the truth," Victor said firmly. That you were in a situation that required you to step away, and now you're ready to return. Any employer worth working for will understand that. And if they don't, then you find one who does. His certainty was absolute. You're 27, Clara. Your whole life is ahead of you. This chapter doesn't define you unless you let it. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that I could rebuild, that the woman I'd been before wasn't lost forever beneath the layers of control and manipulation. But doubt was a heavy thing, and it had been my constant companion for too long. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, a persistent reminder of the reality I was trying to leave behind. I pulled it out with shaking hands, saw his name on the screen, and felt my stomach lurch. 37 messages, I said, my voice hollow. He's escalating. May I? Victor extended his hand for the phone. I hesitated, then passed it to him. He scrolled through the messages, his expression growing progressively colder with each one he read. When he finally looked up, there was something dangerous in his eyes, a controlled fury that should have frightened me, but somehow didn't. He's threatening you, Victor said, his voice deadly quiet. Telling you that leaving proves you're unstable, that he'll make sure everyone knows you're mentally ill, that he has evidence of your instability. He probably does, I said, wrapping my arms around myself. I had panic attacks the last year we were together. He'd trigger them on purpose, then document them, saying he was concerned for my mental health. Creating evidence of the problems he caused, Victor said, fury threading through each word. Classic abuser tactic. Build the narrative that you're the problem so no one questions his control. What do I do? The question came out small, defeated. He knows where Sarah lives. He'll follow me there, make my life hell, convince her I'm the one who's unstable. Victor was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant as he turned something over in his mind. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision made. What if you didn't go to Portland? I stared at him. What? Not immediately, he clarified. What if you took time to establish yourself first? Somewhere he wouldn't think to look for you. Somewhere safe where you could rebuild without constantly looking over your shoulder. I don't have anywhere else, I said helplessly. Sarah's my only option. You have another option now, Victor said, meeting my gaze directly. Me. The offer hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities I couldn't fully process. This man I'd met hours ago, this stranger who somehow understood everything I'd been through, was offering me what? Protection? A place to stay? I didn't even know what he was suggesting. I don't understand, I managed. Victor set my phone down carefully on the table between us. I have resources, Clara. Properties that sit empty most of the year, security that ensures privacy. I can offer you a safe place to stay while you get back on your feet, somewhere he'll never find you. Why would you do that? The question I'd asked earlier in the cafe echoed back. You don't know me. You have no reason to help me like this. Because I can, he said simply. Because I failed to help someone once, and I won't make that mistake again. Because everyone deserves a chance to reclaim themselves, and you shouldn't have to do it while constantly afraid. I can't pay you, I said, practical concerns overwhelming the surge of desperate hope his offer had sparked. I have nothing to offer in return. I'm not asking for payment, Victor said, an edge of steel entering his voice. This isn't a transaction, Clara. This is one person with resources helping another person who needs them. That's all. It sounded too good to be true. Every instinct I'd developed screamed that there had to be a catch. That kindness always came with conditions. But Victor's gaze held no manipulation, no hidden agenda, just a steady certainty that this was the right thing to do. I need to think, I said, my voice shaking. This is all happening so fast. Of course, Victor agreed immediately. Take your time. Rest here for a while. Clear your head. Your bus doesn't leave for another 2 hours. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. He rose smoothly from the chair, moving toward the door with that same controlled grace. I'll be in the lobby if you need me. Order anything you want from room service. It's all taken care of. Victor, I called as his hand touched the doorknob. He turned back, waiting. Thank you for all of this, for seeing me. Something shifted in his expression, a softening that transformed his severe features into something almost vulnerable. You're worth seeing, Clara. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone in luxury I'd never imagined, with an offer I couldn't quite believe, and a choice that would determine everything that came next. I moved to the windows, staring out at the river flowing far below, and tried to imagine what freedom might actually feel like. I must have fallen asleep on the impossibly soft sofa because I woke to darkness outside the windows and a gentle knock at the door. Disoriented, I sat up quickly, my heart racing with the familiar panic of not knowing where I was. Then memory returned. The hotel, Victor, the offer that seemed too impossible to be real. Another knock, more insistent this time. Clara? It's Victor. Your bus leaves in 45 minutes. The words jolted me fully awake. I'd slept for over an hour, lost time I couldn't afford. I stumbled to the door, opening it to find Victor standing in the hallway, his expression concerned. I'm sorry, I said, running a hand through my tangled hair. I didn't mean to fall asleep. I should go. I need to get to the station. You should, Victor agreed, but he made no move to leave. If that's what you want. The qualifier hung between us, heavy with implication. If that's what I want. As if I had choices, real choices, not just the illusion of them. Have you thought about my offer? He asked quietly. I had. The entire time I'd been sleeping, my subconscious had been working through the possibilities, weighing the risks against the potential reward of actually being safe for the first time in years. I don't understand why you're doing this, I said, voicing the fear that had kept me awake before exhaustion claimed me. Nobody helps like this without wanting something in return. Come with me, Victor said, gesturing down the hallway. There's something I want to show you. Every survival instinct I'd developed screamed at me not to follow him, not to go anywhere alone with this man I barely knew. But something stronger overrode those instincts, a bone-deep certainty that whatever else Victor might be, he wasn't a threat to me. We took the elevator down, but instead of stopping at the lobby, Victor pressed the button for the parking garage. When the doors opened, I followed him through the concrete space until we reached a sleek black car that probably cost more than most people's houses. He unlocked it with a soft chirp and opened the passenger door for me. Please, he said, reading my hesitation. Just a short drive. I promise you're safe. I got in, the leather seats conforming to my body with expensive precision. Victor slid into the driver's seat with fluid grace, started the engine with a quiet purr, and pulled out of the garage into the evening traffic. We drove in silence through the city streets, leaving behind the downtown core for residential neighborhoods that grew progressively more upscale. Finally, we turned onto a tree-lined street where massive houses sat behind iron gates, each one more impressive than the last. Victor pulled into the driveway of one such house, pressing a button that made the gates swing open smoothly. The house beyond was beautiful, all stone and glass, with lights glowing warmly from within. This is one of my properties, Victor said, parking near the front entrance. I stay here occasionally when I'm in the city, but mostly it sits empty. Come inside. I followed him to the front door, which he unlocked with a key from his pocket. Inside was even more impressive than the hotel suite had been. High ceilings, hardwood floors, furniture that managed to be both luxurious and comfortable. But what caught my attention was the art on the walls, pieces that even my untrained eye could recognize as valuable. There are 4 bedrooms upstairs, Victor said, leading me through the space, each with its own bathroom. The kitchen is fully stocked. There's a home office with everything you'd need to work on your graphic design, a gym in the basement if you're interested. The security system is state-of-the-art. No one gets in without clearance. He turned to face me, his expression serious. This could be yours, Clara. Not permanently, but for as long as you need it. A place to heal, to remember who you are, to rebuild your life without constantly looking over your shoulder. I stared at him, trying to process the enormity of what he was offering. I don't understand. This is too much. Why would you give me this? Because I can, Victor said again, but this time he continued. And because I know what it's like to feel trapped, to believe there's no way out. He moved to the windows overlooking a garden I could barely see in the darkness. My sister was in a relationship like yours once. I didn't see it, didn't understand what was happening until it was almost too late. What happened to her? I asked softly, moving to stand beside him. I got her out, Victor said, his voice hard. But it took resources, planning, and connections that most people don't have. I had to essentially make her disappear, give her a new identity, set her up in a different country where he could never find her. And did it work? She's happy now, married to a good man, has 2 children. But she lost years of her life to fear, and she can never come back here, never contact old friends or visit our parents' graves. He turned to me, intensity burning in his pale eyes. I swore after that I would never ignore the signs again, that if I ever had the ability to help someone escape that kind of situation, I would do it without hesitation. The raw honesty in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't manipulation or some elaborate scheme. This was a man keeping a promise to himself, trying to save someone because he'd seen what happened when no one did. I'm not a good man, Clara, Victor continued, surprising me with the admission. My business isn't entirely legal, and I've done things I'm not proud of. But I have a code. Women and children are never to be harmed in my world. Never to be used as leverage or collateral damage. And when I see someone being hurt, someone being controlled and diminished, I act. What kind of business? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. The kind that operates in shadows, he said, not bothering to soften the truth. Import, export, protection, information. I move things and people that others can't or won't. I solve problems that exist outside the boundaries of conventional law. You're a criminal, I said flatly. Yes, he agreed without hesitation. But I'm a criminal with rules, with limits, with some measure of honor in a world that often has none. I should have been afraid. Should have walked away from this man who admitted to operating outside the law. But all I felt was a strange sense of relief that he wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. Wasn't hiding behind a respectable facade while his true nature lurked beneath. What would you want from me? I asked, the practical question cutting through the emotional haze. If I accept this offer, stay in your house, use your resources, what would you expect in return? Victor was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching my face as if weighing how much truth I could handle. Nothing you're not willing to give, he said finally. I won't lie and say I don't find you interesting, compelling even. But you're healing from trauma, and I won't take advantage of that. What I want is for you to be safe, to recover, to remember your own strength. And after that, I pressed, after I'm healed and strong again. His smile was slight but genuine. After that, you'll be free to make choices without fear. Whether any of those choices include me is entirely up to you. The honesty was almost painful in its simplicity. No hidden agenda, no manipulation disguised as concern. Just an offer of safety, with no strings attached beyond basic human decency. How long? I asked, feeling myself tipping toward acceptance. How long could I stay? As long as you need, Victor said. Weeks, months, however long it takes for you to feel ready to face the world on your own terms. I turned away from him, moving through the beautiful house, trailing my fingers along expensive furniture, imagining what it would be like to wake up here every morning without fear. To have time and space to rebuild myself without constantly looking over my shoulder. To actually heal instead of just surviving. In the home office Victor had mentioned, I found a professional setup that made my designer's heart ache with longing. High-end computer, professional software, everything I would need to rebuild my portfolio and start freelancing again. How did you know? I asked when he appeared in the doorway. About the design work? You mentioned it at the cafe, he said. I pay attention to details. Something about that statement, the casual way he admitted to cataloging information about me, should have been alarming. Instead, it felt like being seen, really seen, for the first time in years. If I say yes, I said slowly, I need rules, boundaries, clear expectations about what this is and isn't. Of course, Victor agreed immediately. Tell me what you need. My own space that's completely private. No entering without permission. No monitoring what I do or where I go in the house. Agreed. I want to get a job, start earning money again. I won't be dependent on anyone's generosity. There's a studio about a mile from here that's looking for a graphic designer. One of the owners owes me a favor. If you're interested, I can arrange an introduction, but the job would be yours to earn or lose based on your own merit. Why do people owe you favors? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Because I solve problems for them, Victor said with a slight smile. Often expensive, complicated problems that require discretion and resources. So you're like a fixer, among other things. I studied him for a long moment. This dangerous man who was offering me everything I needed, with no apparent expectation of anything in return. Every logical part of my brain screamed that this was too good to be true, that there had to be a catch. But the part of me that had learned to read people through years of survival saw only sincerity in Victor's steady gaze. Okay, I heard myself say. I'll stay. For a while, at least. Until I can afford my own place. Something shifted in Victor's expression. Satisfaction mixed with something deeper that I couldn't quite identify. You won't regret this, Clara. I might, I said honestly. But I'll regret not trying even more. He nodded, understanding the weight of what I was saying. I'll have some things delivered tomorrow. Clothes, toiletries, anything you need. Just make a list. I need to get my stuff from the bus station locker, I said, suddenly remembering. My bag, my laptop, everything I managed to take. We'll go now, Victor said, checking his watch. We have time before the locker room closes. As we drove back through the city, the enormity of what I'd just agreed to began to sink in. I'd chosen the dangerous unknown over the dangerous known, traded one form of dependence for another, albeit one that felt fundamentally different. What about him? I asked suddenly. When he realizes I'm not in Portland, when he starts looking for me here, what happens? Victor's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the steering wheel. He won't find you. I'll make sure of it. How? By being more frightening than he could ever hope to be, Victor said, his voice cold in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. I'll have a conversation with him. Make it clear that you're under my protection now, that any attempt to contact or find you will have consequences he won't enjoy. You'd do that? I whispered. Threaten him for me? I'd do much more than threaten if necessary, Victor said, glancing at me. But it won't come to that. Men like him are cowards at their core. When faced with someone who has real power, they fold. The certainty in his voice should have worried me. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Safe. Not the false safety of being controlled, but the real security of having someone strong enough to stand between me and harm without expecting my diminishment in return. We retrieved my bag from the bus station locker, Victor carrying it to the car despite my protests. As we drove back to the house that would be my sanctuary, I watched the city lights blur past and thought about the strange turn my life had taken. This morning, I'd been planning to flee to Portland, to hide in my cousin's spare room, and hope he wouldn't find me there. Tonight, I was moving into a mansion under the protection of a man who admitted to being a criminal, but who treated me with more respect than anyone had in years. It was madness. It was dangerous. It was probably a terrible decision. But as we pulled through the gates of the house that would shelter me while I rebuilt myself, I felt something unfurl in my chest that I'd thought was dead. Hope. The first week in Victor's house passed in a strange sort of limbo, each day bleeding into the next with a sameness that should have been boring, but felt like healing. I woke each morning to sunlight streaming through the windows of the bedroom I'd claimed as mine, the largest of the guest rooms with its own bathroom, and a view of the garden that was slowly revealing itself as autumn progressed. Victor came by each evening around 7, never earlier despite my growing suspicion that he worked unusual hours. He'd knock, always knock, never using his key even though it was his house. Then we'd share dinner, sometimes something he'd brought from restaurants I couldn't pronounce the names of, sometimes meals I'd prepared using the fully stocked kitchen I'd been surprised to find myself enjoying. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about the art collection he'd inherited from his father, explaining the history and significance of pieces I'd been too intimidated to really look at initially. I told him about my grandmother who'd raised me after my parents died, about her love of color theory, and how she'd encouraged my interest in design. We didn't talk about him, about his business, his past, the darkness he'd alluded to but never fully explained. And we didn't talk about us, about the way the air seemed to change when we were in the same room, charged with something I wasn't ready to name. It was the beginning of the second week when everything shifted. I'd been working on my portfolio in the home office, rebuilding my skills with a determination that surprised me. The studio Victor had mentioned, Design Collective, had indeed called to set up an interview for the following week. I needed work to show them, needed to prove I hadn't lost everything to those 3 years of enforced domesticity. I was so focused on the mock logo I was creating that I didn't hear Victor arrive. Didn't notice him standing in the doorway watching me work until he spoke. "That's beautiful." I jumped, nearly knocking my water glass over in surprise. "You scared me. I didn't hear you come in." "Sorry," Victor said, though he didn't sound particularly apologetic. He moved further into the room, coming to stand behind my chair where he could see the screen. "Is that for your portfolio?" "Just practice," I said, suddenly self-conscious about my work under his scrutiny. "I'm out of practice with the software. Everything's changed in 3 years." "It doesn't look like you're out of practice to me," Victor observed, his hand coming to rest on the back of my chair, close enough that I could feel his presence but not touching me. "You have real talent, Clara." "I used to think so," I admitted. Before he convinced me it was a waste of time, that I should focus on more important things. By which he meant things that served him, Victor said, his voice hard. I nodded, saving my work and turning in the chair to face him. The movement brought us closer than I'd anticipated, close enough that I could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, could smell his cologne mixing with something uniquely him. "How was your day?" I asked, suddenly needing to fill the charged silence. Victor's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "Complicated. I had a meeting with someone who owed me money. He's been avoiding payment for 2 months." "Did you get your money?" I asked, then added, "Should I be asking these questions?" "You can ask me anything," Victor said, his gaze holding mine. "And yes, I got my money. People tend to remember their debts when reminded properly." I should have been disturbed by the implication in that statement, but I found myself curious instead. "What kind of reminding?" "The kind that makes it clear the consequences of continued avoidance would be far more expensive than simply paying what's owed," Victor said. "I'm very good at explaining cost-benefit analyses." Despite myself, I smiled at the dry humor in his voice. "I bet you are." He smiled back, a real smile that transformed his severe features into something almost boyish. "Are you hungry? I brought Chinese food. The good kind, not the takeout place on the corner." We ate at the kitchen island, sharing cartons of food while Victor told me about the restaurant he'd sourced it from, a place hidden in Chinatown that only locals knew about. I told him about my interview preparation, my nervousness about facing real people after so long in isolation. "You'll do beautifully," Victor said with such certainty that I almost believed him. "You're talented, articulate, and you have a work ethic that impresses me. Any company would be lucky to have you." "You barely know my work ethic," I protested. "You see me for a few hours each evening. For all you know, I sleep until noon and watch television the rest of the day." "Do you?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. "No," I admitted. "I've been working 8-hour days on my portfolio, going through tutorials, relearning everything I forgot." "Because you're determined to rebuild yourself," Victor said. "That's not something everyone has. The ability to look at what was broken and decide to fix it rather than accepting the damage." "I had a good teacher," I said softly, holding his gaze. "Someone who showed me I was worth fixing." Something intense flashed in Victor's eyes, there and gone so quickly I almost missed it. "Clara," he said, his voice rough, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. "What?" I prompted, my heart suddenly racing. He stood abruptly, moving to the sink with his empty carton, his back to me. "Nothing. It's not the time." "For what?" I pressed, standing as well and moving closer despite the warning bells in my head. "Victor, what were you going to say?" He turned, and I caught my breath at the intensity in his expression. "I was going to say that it's becoming very difficult to maintain proper boundaries with you. That every evening when I leave here, it gets harder to walk out that door. That I find myself thinking about you at entirely inappropriate times during the day." The confession hung between us, raw and honest. I should have stepped back, should have reminded him that I was still healing, still figuring out who I was outside of someone else's control. But instead, I moved closer. "What if I think about you too?" I whispered. "What if I'm tired of proper boundaries?" "Then I'd tell you that you're still recovering," Victor said, though his eyes betrayed how much the admission affected him. "That you need time to heal before making decisions about what you want from me or from anyone." "What if I don't want time?" I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. "What if I want this? Whatever this is between us?" "Clara." My name was half warning, half plea. "You need to be sure. I'm not a good man. You deserve someone who can give you the normal life you should have had." "I don't want normal," I said, closing the remaining distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Normal got me controlled and diminished and afraid. You make me feel strong. You make me feel seen." His hand came up, cupping my face with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything I knew about him. "You are strong. You were strong before me. You'll be strong after me. I'm just the mirror showing you what was always there." "Stop being noble," I said, leaning into his touch. "Stop protecting me from what I want." "And what do you want?" Victor asked, his voice dropping to something deeper, more dangerous. "This," I breathed, and closed the final gap between us. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't want gentle, didn't want careful. I wanted the intensity I'd seen flashing in his eyes, the passion he kept so carefully controlled. I deepened the kiss, my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. Victor made a sound low in his throat, and then his control snapped. His arm came around my waist, pulling me against him as his other hand threaded through my hair. The kiss turned hungry, consuming, 3 weeks of tension finally finding release. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against mine. "This is a terrible idea," he said, but his arms didn't loosen their hold. "Probably," I agreed. "I seem to be making a lot of those lately." He laughed, the sound surprising and genuine. "Clara Summers, what am I going to do with you?" "Keep me," I said, the words out before I could think better of them. "Just keep me safe and let me be strong." His eyes darkened. "Always," he promised, and kissed me again, sealing the word between us like a vow. The interview at Design Collective went better than I dared hope. The owner, Marcus, was an energetic man in his 50s who reminded me of my grandmother with his passion for color theory and his tendency to talk with his hands. He looked at my portfolio with genuine interest, asked insightful questions about my process, and offered me a position before I'd even left the building. "Part-time to start," he explained, "just 20 hours a week to see how I fit with their team. But with the possibility of full-time if things worked out." The pay was fair, the work interesting, and the flexibility meant I could continue rebuilding myself without the pressure of immediately supporting myself entirely. I called Victor the moment I left the building, unable to contain my excitement. "He offered me the job," I said when he answered. "Marcus, the owner, he actually looked at my work and said I had a fresh perspective." "Of course he did," Victor replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I told you that you were talented." "I start Monday," I continued, pacing on the sidewalk outside the studio. 3 days a week, 8 hours each. It's perfect for getting back into things." "We should celebrate," Victor said. "Dinner somewhere nice. What do you think?" "I think that sounds wonderful," I said, warmth spreading through my chest at the easy way he included himself in my victories. That night, Victor took me to a restaurant I'd only read about in magazines, the kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance, and the dress code was strictly enforced. He'd sent a car for me in the afternoon with several shopping bags, each containing dresses more beautiful than anything I'd owned before. I'd chosen a deep emerald silk that brought out the gold flecks in my eyes, paired with heels that made me tall enough to almost meet Victor's gaze straight on. When he'd arrived to pick me up, the look in his eyes had made me feel more beautiful than any mirror ever could. The restaurant was everything I'd imagined, elegant and intimate with soft lighting that made everyone look like they were lit for a movie. But it was the way Victor looked at me across the table, his attention focused entirely on me despite the world-class food and wine, that made the evening magical. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "To safety," I countered, clinking my glass against his. "And to people who see strength where others saw only weakness." We talked through multiple courses, the conversation flowing easily between serious topics and light banter. Victor told me about growing up in Russia, about immigrating to the States as a teenager, with nothing but his father's connections and his own determination. I told him about my grandmother's influence on my life, about her death 3 years ago, and how I'd met him less than a month later, vulnerable and grieving. "He found you when you were at your weakest," Victor observed, his expression darkening. "That's not coincidence. Men like that have radar for vulnerability." "I know that now," I said, "but at the time I just thought I was lucky someone wanted me." "You were always worth wanting," Victor said firmly. His ability to see that didn't make you lucky. It made him opportunistic. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. "Can we not talk about him tonight? I want this evening to be about moving forward, not looking back." Victor turned his hand under mine, lacing our fingers together. "You're right. Tonight is about celebrating how far you've come." As the evening wore on and the restaurant slowly emptied, neither of us seemed ready to let the night end. When Victor finally paid the check, over my protests about wanting to contribute, he suggested a walk despite the late hour. We strolled through the city streets, my hand tucked into the crook of his arm, talking about everything and nothing. He pointed out buildings he owned or had interests in, told me stories about the city's history that made even familiar corners feel new and interesting. It was past midnight when we finally returned to his car, the city quiet except for the occasional taxi and the distant sound of nightlife from the club district. Victor opened my door, but before I could slide in, he caught my hand. "Clara," he said, his voice serious, "there's something I need to tell you." My heart stuttered, old fears rising instantly. "What is it?" "He's been asking questions," Victor said carefully. "Trying to find you. He's hired a private investigator, filed a missing person report claiming you're mentally unstable and in danger." Ice flooded my veins. "He knows I'm not in Portland." "He knows you never arrived in Portland," Victor corrected. "But he doesn't know where you are, and he won't find you. I've made sure of it." "How?" I asked, needing to understand. Victor's expression hardened. "I had a conversation with him. Made it clear that you were under my protection now, that any further attempts to find or contact you would be inadvisable." "What kind of conversation?" I pressed, though part of me didn't want to know. "The kind that makes men like him reconsider their priorities," Victor said, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. "He won't bother you again, Clara. I promise you that." I should have been frightened by the implications in his tone, by the casual way he discussed threatening someone. Instead, I felt only relief that someone finally had the power and will to make my tormentor back down. "Thank you," I whispered, understanding what he'd done, what he'd risked for me. Victor cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the hardness still lingering in his eyes. "I told you that you're under my protection. I meant it absolutely. No one hurts what's mine." The possessiveness in his words should have alarmed me, should have triggered all the warnings I'd learned about controlling men. But Victor's claim felt fundamentally different from the ownership I'd escaped. This wasn't about diminishing me or controlling my choices. This was about standing between me and harm with the full force of his considerable power. "Yours," I repeated softly, testing the word on my tongue. "Am I yours, Victor?" "Only if you choose to be," he said, his thumbs stroking my cheekbones. "Always your choice, Clara. Always." I rose on my toes, pressing my lips to his in answer. The kiss quickly deepened, weeks of building tension finally finding full release. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against mine. "Come home with me tonight," he said, his voice rough. "Not to the guest house, to my home. Let me show you how someone should be cherished." My heart raced, desire warring with caution. "I'm not sure I'm ready for everything that implies." "Then we do only what you're comfortable with," Victor said immediately. "I just want you close. Want to hold you while you sleep and wake up knowing you're safe." The sincerity in his voice, the way he offered intimacy without demanding sex, made my decision easy. "Okay," I whispered. "Take me home." His home was a penthouse in the financial district, all glass and steel and breathtaking views of the city. But it was the way he guided me through the space, showing me where everything was, making sure I felt comfortable, that made it feel like home rather than just an expensive property. We changed separately, giving each other privacy, despite the growing intimacy between us. When I emerged from the guest bathroom in the silk pajamas I'd found laid out for me, I found Victor waiting in the bedroom, already in bed but sitting up against the headboard. He'd changed into simple sleep pants and a t-shirt, his usual armor of expensive suits stripped away to reveal the man beneath. He looked younger like this, more vulnerable, and somehow even more attractive. I climbed into bed beside him, and he immediately pulled me close, my back to his chest, his arms secure around my waist. It should have felt suffocating, being held like this. But instead, I felt safe in a way I'd never experienced before. "Sleep, Clara," he murmured against my hair. "I've got you." And for the first time in 3 years, I slept through the night without nightmares, protected by arms that held me without trapping me, cherished by a dangerous man who'd given me back myself. 3 months passed in a blur of healing and growth. My job at Design Collective expanded to full-time as Marcus realized I was capable of handling major clients. My portfolio grew, my confidence returned, and slowly, painfully, I began to recognize the woman looking back at me from mirrors. Victor was there through all of it, a steady presence that never demanded but always offered. We fell into a rhythm that felt natural, spending most nights together, but maintaining our separate spaces when needed. He continued running his empire, the details of which he kept carefully separate from our relationship, and I built my career, my independence, my sense of self. But the past, I was learning, never stayed buried forever. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything came crashing back. I was leaving work, laughing at something my colleague Jen had said, when I saw him standing across the street. 3 months should have changed him, should have made him less recognizable. But I would have known him anywhere. That particular posture of coiled tension, the way his eyes tracked my movements with obsessive focus. Terror seized me, freezing me in place on the sidewalk. He saw my reaction, smiled that smile I'd once found charming and now recognized as predatory, and started across the street toward me. "Clara?" he called, his voice carrying that familiar tone of hurt confusion. "Clara, please, we need to talk." But I was already moving, years of survival instinct overriding rational thought. I ran back into the building, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get my phone out to call Victor. He answered on the first ring. "Clara, what's wrong?" "He's here," I managed, my voice breaking. "Outside my work. Victor, he found me." "I'm 5 minutes away," Victor said, his voice dropping into something cold and deadly. "Stay inside. Don't go out for any reason. I'm calling my security now." The next 5 minutes stretched into eternity. I watched through the window as he paced outside, occasionally looking up at the building, his expression cycling between hurt and anger. Jen stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder, having immediately understood that something was very wrong. Then Victor arrived, and everything changed. His car pulled up with the kind of aggressive precision that made pedestrians scatter. He emerged with 2 of his security personnel, men I'd seen occasionally at his penthouse but never really registered. In their dark suits with their cold expressions, they looked like exactly what they were, dangerous men who solved dangerous problems. Victor crossed the street with controlled fury, each step deliberate and threatening. I couldn't hear what he said through the glass, but I saw my ex's expression change from confident to uncertain to afraid as Victor moved into his personal space. The conversation was brief. Victor spoke. My ex tried to respond. Then Victor said something else that made the color drain from his face. One of the security men handed him something, papers of some kind, and then Victor gestured sharply toward the street. My ex looked up at the building one more time, his gaze finding mine through the window. But whatever he saw in my expression, standing there with my colleagues around me, with Victor's protection evident, made him finally understand. I wasn't his anymore. I never would be again. He left, walking quickly away with his shoulders hunched, a man defeated and diminished. Victor watched him go, then turned and strode into the building. I met him at the elevator, throwing myself into his arms the moment the doors closed. He held me tightly, one hand cradling the back of my head, murmuring soothing words in Russian that I didn't understand but felt in my bones. "He won't come back," Victor said when I'd finally stopped shaking. "I've made it very clear what the consequences would be. And the papers my men gave him were a restraining order that's already been filed. If he comes within 500 feet of you, he'll be arrested." "How did he find me?" I asked, pulling back to look at Victor's face. "He got lucky," Victor admitted, his jaw tight with anger at himself. "Hired a better investigator than I gave him credit for. It's my fault. I should have been more careful." "It's not your fault," I said firmly. "It's his for not being able to let go." But Victor, he looked scared. "What did you say to him?" Something dark flashed in Victor's eyes. "I told him exactly what would happen if he ever tried to contact you again. In very specific, very graphic detail. Men like him understand only one language, Clara. Fear. And I made sure he was very, very afraid. I should have been disturbed by the casual violence in his tone. Instead, I felt only gratitude that someone finally had the power to make my tormentor understand what no was really meant. That evening, Victor took me back to his penthouse rather than my house. I didn't argue, needing the security of his presence after the afternoon's events. We ordered takeout but barely ate it, both of us too wired with residual adrenaline. "I should have prevented this," Victor said for the third time, pacing across the living room. "Should have anticipated he'd eventually find you." "Stop," I said, standing and moving to intercept his path. "You're not responsible for his actions. You've done nothing but protect me. Give me space to heal. Help me rebuild myself. Don't take blame for someone else's obsession." Victor stopped, his hands coming up to frame my face. "You're the most precious thing in my life, Clara. The thought of him getting near you, hurting you again." "He didn't," I interrupted. "Because you were there. Because you've always been there when I needed you." "I love you," Victor said, the words fierce and unexpected. "I know it's too soon. I know I shouldn't say it. But I love you, Clara. Not your gratitude, not your dependence. You, the strong, talented, beautiful woman you've always been." Tears filled my eyes, but for once they were tears of joy rather than pain. "I love you too," I whispered. "You gave me back myself, Victor. You made me remember I was worth saving." "You were always worth saving," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I just had the privilege of being there while you saved yourself." The kiss that followed was different from all our previous ones, deeper, more meaningful. This wasn't just desire or comfort or the heat of the moment. This was a claiming on both sides, a choice made with full knowledge and consent. When we finally broke apart, Victor's expression was serious. "I need you to understand something, Clara. My life, my business, it comes with risks, with dangers I can usually control but not always. If you choose this, choose me. You're accepting that reality." "I know what you are," I said steadily. "What you do. And I'm choosing it anyway. Choosing you. Because the danger of loving you is nothing compared to the danger of living without you." "You're sure?" he said, needing the confirmation. "Because once you're mine completely, once we cross this line, I won't be able to let you go." "I don't want you to let me go," I said, rising on my toes to kiss him again. "I want you to keep me, to hold me, to love me the way you've been showing me love should be, without control, without diminishment, without fear." "Always," Victor promised, lifting me into his arms and carrying me toward the bedroom. For as long as you'll have me. As he laid me on the bed with such tenderness it made my heart ache, I realized that this was what freedom actually felt like. Not running away from danger, but choosing what risks to take and with whom. Not avoiding all control, but trusting someone strong enough to protect without possessing. Victor had given me back myself, taught me the difference between ownership and devotion, shown me that strength could be gentle and power could be kind. Whatever dangers came with loving a man who operated in shadows, they were worth it for the way he made me feel seen, valued, cherished. We made love slowly, carefully, Victor attentive to every response, every hesitation, making sure I was comfortable and willing. And when we finally came together, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been, but had always been searching for. Afterward, wrapped in his arms with his heart beating steady beneath my ear, I thought about how far I'd come. From that broken woman crying in a cafe to someone strong enough to stand beside a powerful man without losing herself. From controlled and diminished to free and flourishing. "What are you thinking?" Victor murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my spine. "That I'm grateful," I said, "for everything. For you seeing me when I'd forgotten how to be seen. For giving me space to heal and protection while I did it. For loving the woman I am instead of trying to make me something else." "You're easy to love," Victor said, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "Strong and brave and beautiful. My Clara, who survived hell and came out the other side herself again." "You're Clara," I repeated, testing the words I'd once feared. But in Victor's voice, with Victor's arms around me, they didn't feel like chains. They felt like wings. Outside the windows, the city glittered in the darkness, full of dangers and possibilities in equal measure. Somewhere out there, my past still existed, but it no longer had power over me. I'd faced my fear this afternoon and survived it. Stronger for Victor's presence, but strong in my own right too. Tomorrow I'd go back to work, continue building my career and my independence. Tomorrow Victor would return to his empire, solving problems and maintaining the power that protected what was his. But tonight, we had this moment of perfect peace, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk into the light together. "I love you," I whispered into the quiet. "I love you too," Victor replied, his arms tightening around me. "Always." And for the first time in years, I believed in always again.